Because if this is my last year, if this is my final year, this will be the most epic year of my career. And guess what? I'm calling my shots. And my next shot is this. 10-1. Seattle, Washington.
No, wait a minute.
WrestleDream. I want to fight the guy who calls himself the best technical wrestler in the world. Zack Sabre Jr.
When the American Dragon Bryan Danielson made this announcement, AEW and New Japan Pro Wrestling fans everywhere rejoiced. Finally, after years of uncertainty and one heartbreaking false start leading up to the first Forbidden Door event in 2022, Bryan Danielson vs. Zack Sabre Jr. is finally a made match. At AEW WrestleDream on October 1st in the Climate Pledge Arena, the two greatest technical wrestlers in the world, according to Wrestling Observer newsletter subscribers at least, will lock up to prove who truly is the undisputed modern-day king of mat wrestling. AEW was quick to market this match using a term that many fans were already using themselves. Dream Match. Dream Match. That's a very interesting term to use here, and it may not seem like it if you don't know the history behind this match. Pretty much every wrestling fan knows and understands the concept of a dream match. They're the matches you and your friends and every other wrestling fan come up with in your spare time, in your heads, when thinking about the matches you most want to see, no matter how unlikely they are to happen. You dream up all these mental images about what could happen in them, share these ideas with your friends, and lose your mind when a promoter announces that one of your dream matches is taking place. Holding on to these dreams is part of the fun of being a wrestling fan. Promoters and wrestling community hype beasts know this, and in my opinion, they greatly overuse the term. I might just be old, but to me, it seems like any match that any old group of people wants to see these days is labeled an unbelievable, show-stopping dream match. Like this match. Guys, come on. What is this? It'll probably be awesome, but I guarantee nobody was dreaming about this. Even still, though, most matches that are called dream matches have one thing in common. They've never happened before. There are, of course, exceptions, and Bryan Danielson vs. Zack Sabre Jr. is one of them. You likely already knew this before clicking, and if you didn't, the title of the video gave it away anyway. But this match already happened. Twice, actually. So, since it's already happened, one must naturally conclude that this isn't a real dream match, right? After all, we don't have to dream about what a match between them would look like, because we already know what that match would look like, right? Right? No, actually. We really don't. In fact, I'd argue that Danielson vs. ZSJ, specifically this AEW Danielson vs. ZSJ match, is a dream match in the truest sense of the term. This matchup will be between two critically beloved modern titans in a large arena in front of thousands of fans on pay-per-view for a huge internationally broadcast wrestling company with professional-grade production, the way most wrestling fans have envisioned a Danielson vs. ZSJ clash in their heads for the past few years. That match does not exist in reality yet. We've only been able to picture it in our minds. It's only a dream. The first two matches between these men that actually exist right now are both very much not that dream match. They are not the kind of thing that most wrestling fans would even seek out in the first place. And this is especially true of their first match. The very first match between Bryan Danielson and Zack Sabre Jr. was put on by a promotion unfortunately named Triple X Wrestling in Coventry, England, in the very recent and certainly not disquietingly far off year of 2008. This was back when Bryan Danielson was the talk of the indie scene and one of the most beloved professional wrestlers in niche communities, but years before he conquered the pro wrestling world in the main event of WrestleMania 30. This was back when Zack Sabre Jr. was basically nobody. Back before all the indie hype, before he was the windy man, before Suzuki-gun and the Techers and everyone and everything being a dickhead, he was just an unassuming, albeit promising, young English indie wrestler. This is his very first match listed on Cage Match's match guide, if that tells you anything. The match itself is not a pitched battle between two evenly matched mat wrestling geniuses, but a classic territory-style bout between the talented, conceited, and well-traveled foreigner and a fresh-faced local up-and-comer. The match took place in a club known as the Jolly Beggar Club. At the time, it was also a dream match. A dream match for the crowd inside the Jolly Beggar Club that numbered somewhere south of 50 people. It was uploaded to YouTube by wrestling writer Quentin Moody 5 years ago. The upload has 46,000 views. Compare that with the 327,000 views that Danielson's announcement of the ZSJ match had after 4 days. This makes sense, honestly. Aside from the crisp mat wrestling, this match has virtually none of the things that AEW and New Japan fans want from Bryan Danielson vs. ZSJ at WrestleDream. And that's a large part of the reason why this match is so damn great. The 2008 Bryan Danielson vs. Zack Sabre Jr. match in Triple X is an extremely fun and interesting early modern Brit Rest relic, and a pretty great match to boot. Recently, it has developed a sort of legendary status among devoted fans of these two wrestlers. It's often held up by them as one of Bryan Danielson's biggest triumphs and used as proof of the man's immense wrestling skill, selflessness, and improvisational abilities. As someone who happens to kinda like Bryan Danielson a little bit, I 100% agree with that assessment. However, this match is also just an excellent illustration of the unique strengths of small, independent professional wrestling shows in general, for multiple reasons. After an intro from the ring announcer, both men make their entrances. Zack is out first, sporting a haircut that makes him look like a touring member of Hawthorne Heights. Bryan's out next, and he motions to the audio guy to cut off the final countdown before the eponymous lyric. Nice. The bell rings, and the two competitors shake hands immediately. Zack and Dragon start off by locking up in a Greco-Roman knuckle lock. Amid jabs and jests from the tiny and moderately annoying crowd in attendance, whose allegiances are split about 70-30 in favor of Zack, Bryan starts bullying ZSJ in the corner and then on the mat with his superior strength and experience. Bryan definitely shows a degree of grace to the young up-and-comer, but he more than matches that grace with ruthlessness and flippant cruelty, gleefully and violently toying with the young journeyman. Their early exchanges on the mat are crisp and fluid, but also rough-looking and urgent. Sabre's mat wrestling has very little of the ornate flashiness that he'd later make his calling card, but he still executes some very smart counters and painful-looking holds. For the most part, he and Danielson walk the line between impressive athletic display and simulated struggle quite well. For the first few minutes, the two of them mostly keep things grounded on the mat with no strikes thrown. The mood is chippy, and there's some outright meanness from Dragon, such as when he smashes Sabre's head onto the mat, but he's overall still respectful. He doesn't lapse into outright heelish behavior. Dragon's one of the absolute best at being kind of an asshole while still staying honorable, and Zack, despite not showing a lot of overt emotion, does a good job at picking his comebacks. He's a solid local babyface. They also do a great job of communicating the central story of this match right from the word go, through both overt and subtle means. That story is simple. The American Dragon respects Zack and grows to respect him more, but he still clearly thinks himself superior. And for the most part, he is. He has the upper hand over Zack in physical strength, ruthlessness, resilience, experience, ingenuity. The list goes on. He is clearly the stronger competitor in all respects. Except for maybe one: raw mat wrestling skill and awareness. The early exchanges make it clear that Sabre is no ordinary local wrestler on the mat. His defensive wrestling and grappling games are immediately shown to be excellent when he deftly slips out of Dragon's control multiple times very early on. Later, he also demonstrates his wrestling skill with smart counters, such as sweeping Bryan's hand out from under him to reduce his leverage on this leg hold. Dragon does gain the upper hand on the mat and bullies Sabre continuously for most of the early portion, locking in various painful-looking holds, tossing him to the mat, and, shall we say, lightly torturing him. It's his usual systematic breakdown of his opponents. He doesn't often target one specific limb as opposed to attacking whatever limb he can grab in order to make his opponent as weak as possible before going in for the kill. This works fairly well for him, but at a few points, Sabre will suddenly grab a hold on a limb and gain control, causing Dragon to scramble to the ropes or for a counter. One memorable exchange involves Dragon locking in a figure 4, Zack reversing it, Dragon reversing it into another leg hold, and then Zack countering it by locking in a Kimura. Dragon screams and urgently scrambles to the rope. The crowd chants for Zack as Dragon stares at him, almost as if he's realizing in that moment how formidable the generic-looking young wrestler across from him truly is. Almost as if he's realizing that he may have found someone who actually might be able to match him on the mat. Dragon stands up and shakes his hand again, making his respect known. Danielson regains control after this with a cravat and then a vicious-looking modified tequila sunrise, which causes Sabre to scramble to the ropes, showing that he still has much to learn as a grappler despite his already formidable skill. Interestingly enough, the first significant strike of the match isn't thrown by the more vicious Danielson, but by Sabre. It's a kick from a seated position. They go back to the knuckle lock, but Sabre throws more kicks. This reads to me as Sabre switching up his strategy against a more experienced opponent. It's as if he's getting a bit desperate after Danielson once again outmaneuvered and bullied him on the mat. This switch from primarily defensive grappling to offensive striking works a treat, for a little bit. He backs Danielson up into the corner, and after they're broken up, he shakes Sabre's hand again. Sabre then fires off 2 impressive flying cross-arm breaker attempts, but Danielson, in his infinite grappling skill, is able to block both of them handily. This next spot is the main turning point of the first act of this match. Danielson takes Sabre down and locks in a calf slicer, but Sabre immediately rolls onto his back, positions his boot over Danielson's face, grabs his left arm that's still locked in the slicer, and pries it free, finally locking in a cross arm breaker after the 2 failed attempts earlier. Again, Danielson screams and scurries to the ropes, once again outmaneuvered by an opponent he should be better than. He collects himself on the outside and sells his arm as he gets jeered at by the still fairly annoying crowd. Sabre sits in the ring looking out at him and slightly sells his leg, making it clear that, while hurt, he's still got the better of their mat battle. I love this spot. From Dragon's bullying ways and vicious-looking holds, Sabre's smart but very fluid and easy-to-read counters, Sabre finally locking in the cross-arm breaker after 2 failed attempts, and the immaculate selling of the toll that the exchange took on their bodies, this is both a real showcase of great pro wrestling grappling and awesome storytelling ability. Dragon gets back in the ring, shakes Sabre's hand to show him respect for a 4th time, and then kicks him square in the gut. There you are, heel Dragon. I missed you. A European uppercut and a spinning back kick in the corner is all Dragon needs to take complete control over Sabre. Dragon ties up his legs and spends the next few minutes or so twisting Sabre's shoulder, neck, and face. He makes it blatantly clear that he is very much sick of the young up-and-comer's shit. He fully locks in the Romero special and transitions into a disgusting combination of it and a dragon sleeper. Sabre rolls out and gets to the ropes, and Danielson breaks the hold by stomping Sabre's legs. God, yes. The bullying is in full swing as Dragon locks in a straitjacket. After a very fun series of reversals with Zack valiantly trying to regain control, Dragon wins the exchange and kicks Sabre in the back. He then straight up stands on his head. How he can do that without severely endangering his opponent, I do not know. Dragon grinds Sabre down more in the corner, throws some closed fists to drop him, and then asks the referee to start counting him down. Zack makes it to his feet, and a strike-off begins. Sabre wins the exchange and begins an offensive flurry of slaps, kicks, and even a spinning back kick of his own to regain control for the first time. He follows it up with some drop kicks, with Danielson avoiding one but getting dropped by the other 2. Dragon rolls out of the ring before he's hit by a suicide dive from Zack Sabre Jr. Deeply cursed image. Doesn't look half bad though. Zack's babyface flurry looks a bit ropey athletically speaking, but still looks like it hurts. After this, things get heated and desperate. A German suplex from Sabre is followed by a quick and great-looking roll-up battle. Danielson kicks Sabre down to the mat, fails a pinning combination, locks in the cattle mutilation, and then does his classic, "I have till 5" when Sabre grabs the ropes. Danielson slaps a defensive Sabre in the face while he's on the mat. I love professional wrestling. It's such a simple action, but it's one that inspires such visceral disgust, or adoration if you're a pervert. Danielson does those little things so perfectly. Sabre fires up for a series of quick pinning combinations, and then there's a strike-off. Irish whip from Sabre, Dragon flips off the turnbuckle, Sabre kicks him in the gut. Things are heating up in a typical big match fashion. There's less of the well-considered mat-based action of the early goings, but they try to make up for it with fireworks, and they are pretty cool fireworks. An awesome-looking tiger suplex and subsequent 2 count come from Sabre, who follows it up with an equally great cross-arm breaker to the stunned Dragon. Dragon struggles, rolls Sabre onto his stomach, slips out, and locks in a crucifix pin. 1, 2, 3? It's over? Already? That's it. Sabre's shoulders were on the mat for the 3. The bell rings. Dragon wins. Good match with a somewhat anticlimactic finish. Except, no. This is where this match gets weird. And honestly, this is where it goes from an already really good indie match to something very special. I know, the word special is way overused in this context, but I mean it. As I alluded to earlier, this match has achieved a pseudo-legendary status among a specific set of very online wrestling fans, myself included, especially those who happen to be big fans of Bryan Danielson, myself very much included. Maybe many of them are fans of Sabre too, but this match holds a special significance to the Danielson devotees as a case builder for why they believe he's either among or just is the greatest of all time. So, after the pinfall, here's what happens, at face value, to the naked eye, to someone who doesn't know the many stories behind this match. Immediately after Danielson wins, there's some confusion. Despite the finish being clean as a whistle, the crowd's not having the ref's decision. Right away, Danielson looks confused, and then immediately starts gloating. The announcer announces his victory, followed by a mix of boos and cheers. The referee confers with the ring announcer, who then announces that the ref says he's made a mistake, despite Sabre's shoulders clearly being on the mat for the 3. Danielson grabs the mic and argues with the referee and the crowd about it being a 3 count. Which he's right about, because it clearly was a 3 count. The announcer then says that the fans love Zack and that they both deserve 5 more minutes. Danielson grabs the mic and says that he'll let a young fan wearing a Bryan Danielson t-shirt decide if they get 5 more minutes. The young girl, as anyone who had just watched the great match that preceded this finish would say, says that she wants another half hour. Danielson invites Zack into the ring to go another half hour if they have to. And off they go. Well, that was weird. Danielson clearly just straight up won, but they fudged a controversy for some reason. I wonder if something went wrong. Now, of course, the legend of this part of the match goes that Zack Sabre Jr. was supposed to kick out of that crucifix pin, and he did not. In all versions of the legend, whether the pin was too tight or Sabre just didn't kick out before the referee's hand hit the mat is uncertain. He just didn't kick out. The ref's hand hit the canvas, and the match was over before it was supposed to be over. And though Danielson could have thrown his weight around as a big star and just left, he, the announcer, and the referee fudged a restart angle on the fly to give the fans in attendance the longer and meatier match that they wanted. I call this part a legend because I've never actually heard Dragon, Zack, or anyone involved in XXX Wrestling come out and confirm this version of the story. I've looked all over, and I can't find any specific confirmation that the above events happened the way they happened in this legend. It sure looks like that's what happened, but I can't get a definitive answer. For all we know, that restart or some slightly different version of it could have been planned. I've never heard anyone say otherwise. If an interview of that kind exists, please send it my way so I can issue a retraction. I would love to get a definitive answer on this and hope we get one someday soon. Or that I'm dumb and just missed it. I'll take that too. No matter how true the legend is though, I still have to analyze and judge this angle. Due to how blatant the 3 count was, the whole thing doesn't exactly work on tape. At least, it doesn't work as well as it probably did live, where the victory was more uncertain to people who weren't just seated ringside and could see it super easily. On tape, it's super obvious that Danielson just won. Zack doesn't even kick out right after 3 in a way that would have made it controversial. He's just stuck there in the crucifix. The ref suddenly saying that he made a mistake pushes my suspension of disbelief a bit far. Not too far considering how stupid a lot of sports refs are, but still a little far. Now, pin issues like this would normally hurt a match for me. It sure hurt Phoenix versus Moxley at Dynamite Grand Slam. Jesus, take the wheel. However, the fact that this angle is clearly constructed to make that specific tiny, annoying English live crowd happy with more of a match that they'd been dreaming of seeing, a match that they were already enjoying, makes it hard for me to criticize the quote-unquote flawed execution. The reasoning behind this angle is just so good-natured, lacking in any kind of mean-spiritedness at all. Danielson throws his all into selling it too, and that makes it a lot easier to go along with than it would have been otherwise. If you were to do a cold, logical read of this match's storytelling, you would likely call this angle a flaw in the match. But I personally cannot read wrestling in any kind of coldly logical way. On the purely emotional, gut-based level that I tend to enjoy wrestling on, I love this angle and everything it's trying to do. And if the legend is true, that's just another reason to love it. Okay, so continuing on. The match restarts. Sabre comes in hot and heavy with strikes, dropping Dragon in the corner before then locking in a hold that looks like a pre-alpha build of his insane windy man crap. Dragon slips out and locks in a triangle before elbowing Zack in the head repeatedly. The ref does the 3 hand drops, but Zack keeps his hand up on the 3rd. Great false finish and good babyface fire from Zack as he begins to struggle anew. And then, well, I'll just show you what happens. Zack wins. Yes, he wins with the dreaded superplex roll-up counter. However, this is legit the best version of that counter I've ever seen. It works great. Look at how they do it. Bryan goes for the cover, but Zack hooks him, barely shifts his weight, and pins him while Bryan struggles the whole time. Then, afterwards, Zack is seated, breathing heavily, looking exhausted and in pain. Because, he just took a superplex. Zack, as well as Dragon, did a great job of making the pin look like an adrenaline-fueled desperation counter that came out of nowhere. The way it happened genuinely came as a surprise the first time I watched the match, even while knowing the story behind it. Now, Sabre pinning Dragon is also used as part of the aforementioned legend, as it's said that Dragon willingly gave up a fall to Sabre on the fly, despite that not being originally planned. It's held up as another example of his selflessness. Even if that isn't true, I love the idea of an impromptu one more fall ending in the local guy taking the pin, and they execute it perfectly. And it still is a pretty selfless move from Dragon either way, so the point still stands. After the fall, a furious Dragon threatens to assault the referee as the crowd shouts for one more fall to even things up. The announcer calls for it, the crowd screams, and the two competitors start right back up again. The final fall has probably the least to chew on out of the three falls. It's a flurry of strikes, hammer and anvil elbows, and roll-ups. We have a seated headbutt exchange that Dragon wins handily, showing his physical strength and resilience. We get another I have till 5, a corner dropkick, and a gorgeous back superplex. This is followed by another superplex roll-up counter from Sabre, a roll-up counter to the roll-up counter from Danielson, showing that he's learned from the previous fall, and then 1, 2, 3. It's over. Danielson finally putting away the young dynamo for real this time. There's a standing ovation from the crowd, unsurprisingly. Danielson cuts a simple post-match promo. He calls the crowd the R-slur because it's 2008. He calls Zack a hell of a wrestler, he shakes his hand, and raises it, showing respect for a talented young man who left it all in the ring against a world-traveling wrestling genius. After taking the American Dragon further than anyone expected, and even scoring a pinfall over the man, it sure seems like it will all be upwards from here for Zack Sabre Jr. This is a great match all the way around. It tells such a classic story about the visiting world-traveled heel taking on a local up-and-comer, but it does so without being too obvious and cliched. Danielson is an asshole, but he's not a cartoon villain. He feels like a human being, just a vicious one. Sabre doesn't have much in the way of a personality yet, but this works in the match's favor. He feels very innocent and unassuming, and clearly just wants to try his best against someone who is several steps ahead of him at this point. Aside from the central angle, the way the story builds feels very well considered and organic. It starts as a primarily mat-based match before Sabre's offensive flurry leads to Danielson beating Sabre down and transitioning things into more of a traditional bomb fest. Dragon's emotional reactions and selling are great and go a long way towards making this story believable. Surprisingly, Sabre's no slouch on the selling either. Neither man limps around cartoonishly, but they still make it readily apparent when something hurts. The early goings of this match are easily my favorite due to the abundance of this selling and emotion, as well as a lot of great little details. But the final stretches bring the fireworks as well as any great indie match of the time. Now, the match does have a couple issues. I spoke about my opinion on the impromptu 2 out of 3 falls angle before, but there are definitely other things to criticize. In most of the critiques about this match that I've read, Sabre's inexperience and spotty striking offense are singled out as the weakest part of it. And yeah, that's understandable. I personally think he's good here, but the gulf between his skill and Danielson's is clear, especially when you look at his dropkick and some of his kicks. He also doesn't have the strong personality he developed later. I personally think that this adds to the match, but some might be missing it. On a purely nitpicky level, I felt that Danielson let go of the triangle too early instead of cranking on it for the win, but that could also be read as a strategic mistake on his part. It does stretch my suspension of disbelief a little bit, but it's so small that it's hard to care too much about. Overall though, I freaking love this match, man. I love it both because of the work in the ring and because of the context surrounding it. It's a perfect example of the joy of 2000s indie wrestling. Seeing all of these future stars in these tiny buildings in front of very small crowds, experimenting with styles that would later go on to dominate the pro wrestling landscape, is so much fun for me. Seeing the promotion and wrestlers fudge an angle, potentially on the fly, to give the fans in attendance more of the match they paid to see is just so sweet and good-natured. This is not the match that fans of these two have been dreaming about seeing for the past 5 or so years, but it's the match that the tiny little crowd in Coventry dreamed of seeing, and the two men went above and beyond to make their night. Great match. Highly recommended. 8 out of 10. So, there you have it. The dream match that kind of already happened. Now, let's turn away from the past and instead dream about the future. Could the upcoming WrestleDream dream match be better than this first encounter in Coventry? Yeah. Maybe. I think it's possible. Danielson and ZSJ are smart, creative, and athletically talented wrestlers with years more wrestling experience under their belts than they had back in 2008. I trust them to come up with something truly special for a crowd hungry to see their dream become a reality, just as this tiny crowd was hungry for the same thing 15 years ago. And I personally might even like it more. But it won't be because it takes place in a massive arena in front of thousands of fans. Some fans think that alone makes a wrestling match better than a match that takes place in bingo halls and smoky bars. Some even think that those kinds of matches are indie trash that should be ignored. I think that's ridiculous. Much of the greatness of the first Danielson vs. Sabre match comes from the fact that it was wrestled for a specific tiny audience. The creative freedom and laissez-faire attitude towards angle construction are what caused this match to be what it is. For example, let's say the legend is true, and Sabre didn't kick out at 3 as planned. If AEW wanted to restart this match in the exact same way, there's all sorts of red tape that they would probably have to go through due to AEW being a televised product with time constraints. Because the XXX show was just an indie show put on by a small company, they didn't have to worry about that. And that's just one example. There is so much to enjoy about the free spirit and abundant creativity that can often be found in this kind of indie wrestling. It's also very important in the overall landscape of professional wrestling. Dragon and ZSJ would not be where they are today if not for shows like these. They're necessary for the health of the industry. This match in particular was apparently pretty important to the growth of Zack's career in particular. In my opinion, the existence of both matches should be celebrated. The fact that such a special match between the two exists so early on in both men's careers is wonderful. Its place in their history provides a rich tapestry for all future matches between them to draw from. Wrestling is at its best when it's a giant overlapping web of cause and effect, and when the existence of these tiny matches is acknowledged by the characters and the shows they're on, the stories become even richer. We saw it during the Great Eddie Kingston vs. Claudio Castagnoli feud this year, built off an indie feud from 12 years ago, and we're about to see it here. I think that the fact that Bryan Danielson vs. Zack Sabre Jr. in AEW is such a huge dream match is also worthy of celebration. This match is still only a dream, but very soon, it won't be. And that's because of you guys. I think wrestling fans dreaming of the future is a key part of what keeps this art form going. It's fun to dream of big arenas with loud crowds and amazing production, and wrestlers at the peak of their powers with all of the marketing hype in the world behind them. However, there are many incredible matches out there that have none of these things behind them. Some of them are that incredible because they have none of those things behind them. Sadly, many fans never even find out that they exist, even if they're between the wrestlers they're dreaming about. The marketing just simply isn't there. I'm guilty of this too. I've been wanting this big Danielson vs. ZSJ Dream match for years, but I didn't even know about this original match between them until about a little less than 2 years ago. This match taught me a lot about wrestling history and how there's always more to discover. And it gave renewed fire to my biggest pro wrestling dream in the process. My dream is not of any single match or feud or scenario. My dream is for the stigma surrounding smaller independent wrestling companies to disappear and to be instead replaced with respect and curiosity. My dream is for wrestling to be appreciated for its artistic value and not for the crowds and money it draws. My dream is for the existence of these smaller matches outside of mainstream American TV wrestling to be more widely acknowledged and watched and studied. We've come a long way. This kind of wrestling is more popular than it's ever been. But there's still a ways to go. If you're an AEW or WWE fan who hasn't delved into that kind of wrestling, I'm going to put links in the description to a bunch of channels from creators I highly respect who talk at length about niche pro wrestling in their videos. These guys are doing great work, and I hope their channels continue to grow. They're at the forefront of making my dream a reality. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field frozen with snow. Alright, this one's in the can. We're back.